The cold Boston air bit through jackets that late November afternoon in 2008, the kind of chill that seeps into your bones. School had just ended at Milton Ridge Middle School, and parents' cars idled along the curved drop-off zone. A yellowing sun dipped beneath slate-colored clouds, casting long shadows across the pavement. Inside the main building, students trickled out of classrooms, chatter echoing through tiled hallways. 12-year-old Ethan Miller was one of the last to leave. His backpack was slung over one shoulder, navy blue with a Red Sox keychain dangling from the zipper. Surveillance footage would later show him stepping through the main exit at 3:17 p.m. He pauses at the doorway, turns briefly to glance behind him, then walks out of frame. That would be the last confirmed sighting of him. The next footage, from an exterior camera facing the school's front sidewalk, showed only empty concrete. No Ethan, no cars stopping to pick him up, just a sudden void. It took 45 minutes for anyone to realize he was missing. By then, his mother, Claire, had arrived in a panic, circling the school lot 3 times, calling his phone again and again, each call going to voicemail. Staff checked the classroom. Friends were questioned. Buses halted. Still nothing. A quiet panic started to grow. Ethan was gone. News vans would line the street within 24 hours. Candlelight vigils were held, flyers stapled to poles. Helicopters scanned the wooded area behind the gymnasium. Dogs were brought in. Nothing. What made Ethan's disappearance so haunting wasn't just its swiftness, it was its silence. No witnesses, no signs of struggle, no ransom. Just a boy who vanished between one camera frame and the next. And for 16 years the question remained, what happened to Ethan Miller until now? 16 years later, in the spring of 2024, a routine HVAC replacement inside the abandoned west wing of Milton Ridge Middle School led maintenance workers to an old ventilation unit, sealed shut, rusted around the edges. When the panel was pried open, the foul smell was the first thing to hit. Inside, tucked deep in the metal cavity, was a mold-stained, partially decomposed backpack, navy blue. A faded Red Sox keychain still attached. The initials EM stitched on the inside flap confirmed it. The backpack belonged to Ethan Miller. The finding sent a jolt through the Boston community. What had been a cold case, filed and forgotten by most, suddenly burned with new urgency. Local papers erupted. Investigators returned to the school grounds. The Miller family, what was left of it, was pulled back into a nightmare they had tried for over a decade to survive. But this story isn't just about a backpack. It's about a quiet boy who drew comic strips in his notebooks, who loved blueberry Pop-Tarts and always wore mismatched socks. It's about the grief of a mother whose life was split into 2 eras, before Ethan and after. It's about a school with secrets baked into its bricks, about the things adults chose not to see, and the silence they thought would protect them. And it's about what happens when the truth refuses to stay buried, because the discovery of Ethan's backpack was only the beginning. What followed would uncover a chain of mistakes, cover-ups and devastating truths that had waited, trapped in the dark, for 16 long years. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a moment of this unfolding story. What happened to Ethan Miller will not only break your heart, it will challenge everything you thought you knew about trust, responsibility, and justice. Stay with us. Before the headlines and the candlelight vigils, before the grainy surveillance footage was replayed over and over on every television screen in Massachusetts, Ethan Miller was just a kid. He lived on the 2nd floor of a small duplex in Dorchester with his mother, Claire, and his older sister, Jessica. Their apartment was modest, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, always filled with the comforting aroma of coffee, lavender cleaning spray, and the faintest scent of vanilla from Claire's hand lotion. The walls were decorated with family photos, most of them taken at local parks or birthday parties, where Ethan often wore superhero t-shirts and made exaggerated faces for the camera. Ethan was the kind of child who noticed things others didn't. He'd stop walking just to watch a line of ants cross the sidewalk, or linger behind during class transitions to fix a crooked poster on the wall. His teachers described him as curious, quiet, and unusually observant. He wasn't loud or disruptive. If anything, he often disappeared into the background, blending in like furniture. But when he spoke, people listened. He had a way of making even the simplest thoughts sound important. His favorite class was art, though he never showed his drawings to anyone except Jessica. She was 16, rebellious in her eyeliner and sarcasm, but soft with Ethan. He called her Jess and she called him Bug, a nickname from when he used to pretend to be a caterpillar wriggling across the living room carpet. They would sit together after school, he sketching little characters in his notebook, she scrolling through music on her iPod. Sometimes he'd draw cartoons of their family, Claire as a nurse with superhero gloves, Jessica with a guitar, and himself riding a dragon. Claire worked long hours at Boston General Hospital, often on night shifts. She kept their world running on a thin thread of discipline and love, packed Ethan's lunch every morning, and left notes in his backpack that read, "Proud of you, always," in blue pen. She worried about money, about Jessica's growing distance, but mostly about Ethan, his sensitivity, his tendency to be alone. Still, he never gave her trouble. He was the kind of kid who remembered to feed the cat and always double-checked the locks before bed. A week before he disappeared, something changed. Claire remembered it clearly. Ethan came home one afternoon quieter than usual, his face pale, his backpack hugged tightly to his chest. She asked if he was okay. He said yes, just tired. Later that evening, Jessica told her he'd been late coming out of school, that he looked like he'd been crying. Claire brushed it off. Kids had bad days all the time. But now, in hindsight, every detail from that week would come back with brutal clarity. On Thursday of that same week, Ethan had scribbled something in his sketchbook that Jessica found odd. A drawing of a door slightly open, with darkness spilling out like smoke. Above it, in bold letters, "Don't follow the whistle." She assumed it was from one of his comics, maybe something he was inventing. But when she asked him about it, he quickly flipped the page and changed the subject. The next day he didn't bring his sketchbook to school, and on Monday he disappeared. It was only later, when Jessica opened his drawer in search of a charger, that she found a folded piece of paper hidden beneath his socks. A list, written in Ethan's messy scrawl. 3 items. Don't go near the west hallway. Stay in sight of the windows. Never listen to the vent if it calls. None of it made sense. Not yet. What Ethan saw, or thought he saw, that final week remained a mystery. But his quiet world, the warmth of home, the love of his family, the laughter at dinner when Jessica told jokes, was suddenly gone, replaced by silence, confusion, and dread. And for Claire, that dread would never leave. Monday, November 17th, 2008, began like any other. Claire woke Ethan up at 6:45 a.m., made him toast with peanut butter, and packed his lunch: turkey sandwich, apple slices, and a juice box. He wore his favorite hoodie, grey with a faded lightning bolt, and jeans that were just beginning to fray at the knees. He left the apartment at 7:30, walking the 4 blocks to Milton Ridge Middle School. It was a routine they'd done for months. Nothing felt wrong, not at first. Ethan had 4 classes that day: math, history, science, and art. According to his teachers, he was quiet but attentive. He turned in a quiz, helped a classmate with their project, and even smiled during lunch when his friend Marcus told a joke about their math teacher. No one reported anything unusual, no arguments, no visible distress. At 3:11 p.m., the first security camera caught Ethan exiting his last class. He walked alone through the main hallway, stopped briefly at his locker, then proceeded toward the school's front entrance. He didn't appear rushed. He wasn't looking over his shoulder. At 3:17 p.m. he stepped out of the main exit. That was the last image captured. The second exterior camera was positioned to cover the sidewalk and parking lot. The footage showed a few parents waiting in cars, other students chatting in small groups. But Ethan never appeared. He should have passed directly into view. He didn't. Claire arrived at 3:35 p.m. as usual. She texted him, "I'm here." No reply. She waited 10 minutes, assuming he was held back by a teacher. At 3:45 she called. It went straight to voicemail, then again, and again. By 4 p.m. she was inside the school, asking the front desk if anyone had seen her son. The secretary looked confused. She called the intercom. No response. A sweep of the classrooms came next. Teachers were asked. Students too. His locker was opened. It was empty except for an old eraser and a rolled-up poster from art class. By 4:30, panic set in. The principal, Mr. Kendrick, called the Boston Police Department. An officer arrived at 5:10 p.m., took the initial report, and issued a missing child alert to local patrols. That evening, Claire called Jessica, who was at a friend's house. Jessica returned home sobbing, insisting Ethan had messaged her during lunch and seemed completely normal. Detective Raymond Connors was assigned to the case by morning. A veteran with over 20 years of experience in juvenile cases, Connors began with the basics. He interviewed staff, reviewed surveillance, mapped Ethan's known route home, but nothing added up. Her child doesn't just vanish in daylight. From the front of a school filled with students and teachers and cameras, a canine unit was deployed. The dogs picked up Ethan's scent near the bushes adjacent to the building's west wing, but then lost it. There were no signs of a struggle, no tire marks, no dropped items, no witnesses. His phone remained off, his bank card untouched. His online account silent. By Tuesday, local news stations had picked up the story. Dorchester boy missing after school, read the headlines. The image most frequently shown was of Ethan's sixth-grade portrait. Slight smile, brown eyes wide, hair a little too long over the ears. Posters went up. Vigils were organized. Volunteers combed through nearby woods. The school cancelled all extracurricular activities. Parents pulled their children out in fear. Helicopters flew overhead. Tips came in, dozens of them. A red car seen speeding. A suspicious man near the dumpsters. A scream heard from the alley. None of them led anywhere. The days turned colder. Search parties shrank. Reporters moved on. But Claire didn't. Each morning she returned to the school steps, staring at the doors her son had walked through. She kept hoping. Maybe he ran away. Maybe he'd call. Maybe it was a mistake. But deep down she knew. Something had taken him. What exactly happened between 3:17 p.m. and the next frame, less than 5 seconds later, remained an impossible gap. A gap that would swallow the Miller family whole. Grief does not begin with a scream. It begins with silence. In the days after Ethan vanished, Claire Miller stopped sleeping. At first, she sat on the living room couch with her phone clenched in her fist, refreshing her inbox, waiting for a message, a tip, anything. She refused to go to work, she refused to eat. The only thing she did was move from room to room, touching Ethan's belongings. His favorite mug, the hoodie draped on his chair, the barely finished comic page on his desk. Jessica tried to help, but she was unraveling too. Her voice turned sharp, her eyes rimmed red, her frustration barely concealed. "Mum, we have to talk to someone," she said one night. Claire didn't answer. She just walked into Ethan's bedroom and closed the door behind her. Detective Connors came by often at first. He brought updates, though they were always the same. No leads, no sightings, nothing new. Claire clung to him, asking the same questions over and over, begging him to double-check the footage, to interrogate teachers again, to comb the playground one more time. Connors was patient. He had seen this kind of pain before, the kind that chews a parent from the inside. He sat with her, notepad in hand, gently guiding her through timelines, memories, anything she could recall. Claire told him everything: Ethan's fear of the dark, his growing quietness that past week, the odd drawing Jessica had mentioned, but even that felt like smoke in the wind. There was no hard evidence, no witness, no sign of struggle. It was as if Ethan had dissolved into thin air. Claire's obsession deepened. She began calling the police station daily, then twice a day, then 5 times. She demanded to see security footage herself, and when denied, threatened to go to the press. She combed online forums for other missing child cases, sending messages to strangers, comparing notes, searching for patterns. One night, 2 weeks after the disappearance, she posted Ethan's photo to a private Reddit thread about urban legends. The title read, "My son vanished from school." Has anyone seen drawings like this? She attached a photo of the sketch Jessica had shown her, the one with the black doorway and the phrase, "Don't follow the whistle." The responses were mixed: sympathy, confusion, trolls. But one comment stood out. "I saw that phrase before, in a school fire escape near Pittsburgh, written on the wall in chalk, years ago. Gave me chills." Claire replied instantly, but the user never responded again. Her descent continued. She pinned maps to the wall, marked timelines, created connection charts. Her apartment became a war room, every surface covered in papers and printouts. Friends stopped calling, co-workers gave up. Even Jessica withdrew, spending nights at her friend's place, claiming she couldn't breathe in that apartment anymore. Meanwhile, the media cycle moved on. Within a month, Ethan's story had faded from the headlines. Other tragedies replaced it. Fires, floods, politics. The school reopened fully. Students returned to normal, at least on the outside, but inside the Miller home, time had stalled. And Claire's anger began to turn toward the school. She became convinced they were hiding something, that someone knew more than they admitted. She requested building blueprints, she demanded janitorial logs, she filed Freedom of Information requests, and cornered teachers in parking lots. When she confronted the principal, Mr. Kendrick, outside a school board meeting, she was escorted away by security. Still, Claire didn't stop. She documented every conversation, every visit, every name. She filled a dozen notebooks with observations. She began noticing inconsistencies, records that didn't match, staff that had transferred quickly after the incident, rumors that were quickly shut down, and yet nothing concrete. Detective Connors watched this transformation with quiet concern. He admired her strength, even as it twisted into obsession. He tried to keep her grounded, but he knew sometimes grief doesn't want reason. It wants motion, and Claire needed motion. But even he couldn't ignore that gut feeling. Something about this case was off, too clean, too quiet. And Claire? She wasn't letting go. The disappearance of Ethan Miller didn't just fracture a family, it unsettled an entire neighborhood. Milton Ridge Middle School became a symbol overnight. Parents whispered in hushed tones at drop-off, glancing nervously toward the front entrance where Ethan was last seen. Children who once sprinted through the halls now walked with eyes wide, clutching their backpacks tighter. Fear crept in like fog, quiet, slow and suffocating. Within days, Principal Kendrick ordered additional security measures. Visitor logs were tightened, hall monitors were added. The west wing of the school, already half abandoned due to old plumbing, was officially restricted. Safety first, he told the parents at an emergency meeting. But the tone in the auditorium was cold, distrustful. The administration's reassurances sounded rehearsed, even hollow. Parents demanded answers. Why was there a blind spot between camera feeds? Why were no staff near the front entrance at dismissal? Why hadn't the police found anything? Rumors blossomed in the absence of clarity. Some said Ethan had run away, others whispered darker theories, abduction, trafficking, even something supernatural. The school became a breeding ground for speculation. In the middle of it all was Walter Greaves. He had worked at Milton Ridge for over a decade, mostly doing janitorial work. He was quiet, unassuming, in his late 50s, with thick glasses and a stoop from years of physical labor. Most kids didn't notice him. The ones who did called him Mr. Greaves and said he was weird but harmless. He rarely spoke to anyone outside of maintenance staff and had a reputation for working late hours alone. After Ethan vanished, some students mentioned seeing Greaves near the West Wing on the same day. Others claimed they saw him wheeling a cart toward the old utility stairwell minutes after school ended. When Detective Connors interviewed him, Greaves was cooperative, nervous but compliant. He said he was repairing a broken vent in the West Wing. He remembered seeing Ethan in the hallway earlier, but didn't notice anything strange. His alibi checked out. The school confirmed he had filed a work order that morning. Still, something didn't sit right. Claire, upon hearing his name, immediately latched onto it. She remembered him vaguely from parent nights, cleaning the cafeteria or adjusting the stage lights during performances. He had that look, disconnected, always watching, but never part of anything. When she requested his personnel records, the school denied access, citing privacy laws. That only fueled her suspicions. Jessica, too, had her doubts. She remembered a moment, weeks before Ethan vanished, when he came home upset saying someone had followed him through the hallway. He hadn't said who. Jessica didn't press. But now the memory haunted her. As the weeks dragged on, the community's tension deepened. Students began drawing strange things, doors in vents, shadowy figures in stairwells. Some teachers dismissed it as fear manifesting in imagination. Others weren't so sure. One sixth grader, Lily Martinez, told her parents she heard someone whispering from inside the air ducts during math class. When her father demanded the school check the vents, Principal Kendrick called it a case of collective hysteria. Claire wasn't so dismissive. She wrote down the details, even tracked down the classroom's maintenance log, but nothing official came of it. The tipping point came during a storm in mid-December, when part of the old West Wing's roof collapsed under heavy snow. The wing had been closed off, but the incident reignited public outrage. Parents demanded the entire building be inspected. When reporters returned to cover the structural failure, Claire seized the opportunity. She stood outside the gates holding Ethan's picture, flanked by Jessica and a few neighbors. "Something is being hidden," she told a local news crew. "We're not leaving until they open that wing." The image of her standing in the snow, her face pale with cold and fury, made the evening news. It galvanized some, irritated others. The school board called her behavior disruptive, but the community, they were listening. Because while Ethan's face was fading from television, his name still echoed through the hallways. Empty desks reminded classmates. The space beside his locker remained untouched. And in the hearts of many, an uncomfortable question lingered. If a child could vanish here, right under everyone's noses, what else had gone unnoticed? Winter melted into spring, and still, there was no trace of Ethan Miller. The search efforts slowed. Police presence around the school dwindled. Flyers on telephone poles began to fade and peel, curling under the damp air of early April. What once was a neighborhood in high alert now became a place of quiet resignation. Ethan's face no longer stared from front pages. His name wasn't trending. The world moved on. But Claire didn't. For her, time fractured the day her son disappeared. Every morning began with the hope that maybe, just maybe, someone would call, that a tip would surface, that a clue would break through the silence. Every night ended the same, her standing at Ethan's door, hand on the knob, listening for something she knew would never come. She stopped attending family holidays, couldn't bring herself to buy groceries without checking the cereal aisle for his favorite brand, couldn't walk by the school without her knees weakening beneath her. Her life became a cycle of rereading the police report, watching the surveillance footage, tracing maps with red pens, and searching message boards that blurred the line between evidence and obsession. Jessica, meanwhile, tried to hold the weight of a broken family. She became the one to answer calls, manage bills, and sometimes just sit with her mother in long, wordless stretches. But it wore her down. The grief was sharp, unrelenting, and for a teenager still trying to become herself, it was suffocating. That summer, Claire received an envelope in the mail, no return address. Inside was a backpack. It looked like Ethan's. Same navy color, same Red Sox keychain. Her heart caught in her throat. She opened it carefully, breath shallow. Inside, a crumpled hoodie, notebooks with Ethan's name, a crushed juice box, a faded drawing. She dropped to the floor, weeping. Detective Connors had it processed within the hour. The results came back 2 weeks later, not Ethan's. The contents were similar, eerily so, but the DNA didn't match. The notebooks were forgeries, the backpack was a replica. Someone had gone to great lengths to mimic what had already been seen in the media. It was a cruel game. Claire collapsed deeper into herself after that. She became paranoid, sure she was being watched. She stopped trusting anyone, neighbors, police, even Jessica at times. She installed cameras in the apartment, triple-locked doors, and kept every light on through the night. When Connors visited, she accused him of withholding information, but Connors remained steady. He still checked in, even when the department shifted focus. He knew how these cases usually ended. He had seen too many parents lost to the long silence. But something about Claire stirred him. Her clarity, her insistence that something wasn't right. He began digging deeper, on his own time. Not just into Ethan's case, but others. children who had vanished near schools, unsolved files, inconsistencies in statements. He started to see patterns. Claire didn't know what Connors was doing behind the scenes, only that he was the last person still treating her like Ethan mattered. She clung to that, even as the world forgot. The anniversary of Ethan's disappearance came quietly. There were no vigils, no reporters, just Claire standing outside Milton Ridge with a candle and a photo. Jessica was there too, but at a distance, arms crossed, eyes distant. They hadn't spoken much in weeks. The weight of grief had splintered them. As Claire lit the candle, the school's exterior lights flickered on, illuminating the facade. For a moment, it looked like nothing had changed. But Claire knew better. Everything had changed, and deep down something told her this wasn't over. She returned home that night, placed Ethan's photo back on the shelf, and turned off the light. But the thought haunted her. If the backpack was fake, who sent it, and why? By the time the second year without Ethan began, Jessica Miller was no longer the same girl. Grief had aged her faster than time could. Once a teenager obsessed with music and late-night texts, she now floated through her days like a shadow, half present in conversations, eyes fixed somewhere far behind her. At school, teachers gave her leeway. Friends tried to include her, but she didn't answer texts anymore. She dyed her hair black, wore dark hoodies even in the heat. When people spoke of Ethan, she either left the room or stared until the speaker grew uncomfortable. At home, she clashed with Claire constantly. The apartment had become a mausoleum, lights always on, curtains always drawn, no music, no laughter. Only the hum of surveillance monitors Claire had installed, and the whisper of her voice as she reread Ethan's case files aloud like scripture. "Mom, he's gone," Jessica blurted once during dinner. "You have to stop this." Claire's fork clattered onto her plate. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She simply stood, took her dish to the sink, and turned on the water. Jessica stormed out. She spent most nights at her friend Aria's apartment, sleeping on the floor, skipping school, wandering the city alone. Her grades dropped. She stopped answering calls. Part of her hated herself for it. The other part didn't care. She felt like she was suffocating in a tragedy she didn't cause but couldn't escape. One evening, weeks into a particularly bitter fall, Jessica returned home looking for her old charger. Claire wasn't there. The living room was a mess. Papers everywhere, maps with lines and circles, folders opened like crime scene wings. Jessica stepped around it all and went into Ethan's room. It hadn't changed. His books were still on the shelf, his comic posters still taped crooked on the wall, his sketchbook stacked neatly in the drawer beside his bed. She pulled one out. Page after page of drawings. Monsters with shadowed eyes, doorways with darkness pouring through, scribbled phrases, "Stay in the light." "They watch the vents." "No one believes you." Her fingers trembled as she flipped through. Near the back, she found one that stopped her. It was a crude sketch, but detailed enough. Ethan had drawn the outline of something that looked like the school. He labeled rooms, cafeteria, science lab, main office, and near the corner, marked in red ink, was a block labeled West Wing. Next to it, a small rectangle with the words, "Do not open." Below that, a vent. Jessica sat down hard on the bed, heart pounding. She searched the drawer for more. Inside a manila envelope were a handful of torn pages, mostly drawings of corridors and ductwork, all with repeating symbols, spirals, eyes, a jagged line that resembled static. At the bottom of the envelope was a single sticky note with one word: listen. She didn't know what any of it meant, but something had shifted inside her. Ethan hadn't just disappeared. He'd been scared. And he'd left clues, messages no one had noticed or, worse, ignored. Jessica slipped the sketchbook into her backpack and left before Claire returned. That night, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking of the sketch, the phrase, "Do not open," the red ink, the symbols. She felt a pull, a thread connecting Ethan's fear to a physical place. She hadn't cared before, not really. Not beyond the pain, but now she wanted answers. The next morning she skipped school. She took the bus to Milton Ridge and walked the perimeter slowly, stopping across from the shuttered west wing. It was chained and boarded, construction tape fraying in the wind. No signs, no warnings. She took out her phone and snapped a photo. Later that evening, she opened Ethan's sketchbook again and compared it. The proportions matched. He'd drawn that exact spot, with a vent no one had ever talked about. And suddenly, she remembered something Ethan had said the week before he vanished. They were walking home from the corner store. He'd stopped mid-step and looked up at the school in the distance. "Jess," he whispered, "if you ever hear something coming from the vent, don't answer." She thought it was a joke back then. Now she wasn't so sure. Jessica didn't tell her mother about the sketchbook. Not yet. She needed to be sure. The next morning, she returned to Milton Ridge during school hours. The new principal, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Halpin, greeted her coldly at the front desk. Jessica claimed she was there for a class project about school infrastructure. Halpin didn't seem convinced, but allowed her to walk the main corridor under supervision. From the main hallway, Jessica could see the chained double doors leading to the west wing. They looked old, the paint chipped, and the glass fogged with time and dust. She asked a staff member casually why that section was closed. "Old wings condemned," the woman said. "Mold. Unsafe structure. No one's been in there for years." Jessica nodded but didn't believe her. Later that evening, back home, she waited until Claire was asleep, then pulled up the Boston Public School archives online. It took hours, but eventually she located renovation permits. The West Wing had been slated for demolition in 2006 due to asbestos concerns, but that work had never been completed. Instead, patch jobs were approved yearly to avoid full closure. Maintenance logs showed frequent complaints, temperature fluctuations, mechanical failures, electrical inconsistencies. More importantly, one note stood out, dated November 18, 2008, the day after Ethan vanished. "Ventilation duct blocked. Reported by Greaves, marked for inspection, no follow-up recorded." Jessica's breath caught. Walter Greaves. She searched his name in employee directories. He was still listed as active until 2011, then marked as transferred to district storage facilities. No explanation, no retirement, no termination. She printed the log and brought it to Connors. He hadn't expected to see her. She hadn't spoken to him in nearly a year. Jessica handed him the paper silently. Connors read it 3 times before speaking. "This was never in the official case file," he murmured. Jessica told him about the sketchbook, about Ethan's warnings, about the vent. Connors nodded slowly, the gears in his mind shifting back into motion. "We'll need to revisit the school." Off the record, he made calls, quiet ones. A retired building inspector owed him a favor. That weekend, under the guise of safety evaluation, they re-entered the West Wing. The air inside was stale, damp, and heavy with disuse. Water-stained walls, exposed piping, and the distant drip of unseen leaks created an eerie rhythm. The janitor's closet near the mechanical room still bore Greaves' faded name on a schedule sheet, untouched since 2008. Jessica followed close behind as Connors used a crowbar to pry open a rusted vent cover in the ceiling corner, exactly where Ethan had marked it in the drawing. Inside, coated in layers of dust and age, they found something wedged deep in the ductwork, a crumpled scrap of paper. Connors used tweezers to pull it out. It was damp, fragile but legible. Ethan's handwriting, a short sentence, "Still here, please help." Jessica turned pale. Her knees almost buckled. Connors bagged it carefully. The duct behind it twisted out of reach, too narrow to crawl through. He made another call. A team would need to inspect the full system, professionally and discreetly. When Claire was told what they'd found, she didn't cry. She simply sat down and whispered, "I knew it. I knew he was in that building." It wasn't closure, but it was proof. Proof that Ethan had still been alive after he vanished, that he had been trapped, that someone had failed to follow up on a blocked vent, that someone had ignored a child's silent plea. The school denied responsibility. They claimed turnover, lost records, administrative confusion, but Connors didn't buy it. Neither did Claire. And Jessica, she wasn't afraid anymore. She was furious. There was more to uncover. It began with a noise. During a scheduled HVAC inspection in the West Wing, authorized quietly by Connors and pushed through under safety pretense, an engineer noted an odd metallic echo inside one of the sealed ducts on the upper level. It wasn't airflow, it wasn't a rodent. It sounded like something loose shifting with vibration. The team decided to dismantle the section of the ventilation system directly above the old art room, near where Ethan had last been seen. The unit hadn't been serviced in over 15 years. The screws were rusted. The bolts crumbled under pressure. It took nearly 2 hours to pry the panel off. The air that rushed out was foul, stale, like rot and dust trapped together. Inside, wedged at the back of the metal chamber, was a backpack. It was deteriorated, coated in mold, fabric weakened by time. But the Red Sox keychain was still there, rusted but intact. A small patch with the letters EM was faint but legible. There were 2 worn notebooks inside, their pages clinging together from moisture. One held pencil sketches, Ethan's style unmistakable. The other contained what looked like a diary. No bones, no body, just his things. Connors called Claire before the forensics team had even finished photographing the scene. She came immediately. Jessica came with her. When Claire saw the backpack, her hand flew to her mouth. Her knees gave out, but she didn't cry. She stared at it the way someone might stare at a casket. For the first time in 16 years, there was something solid, something real. The bag was sent for DNA testing, and the results were conclusive. Ethan's fingerprints, Ethan's skin cells, his saliva on the inside of a juice box straw. There was no doubt. He had been there. The diary, fragile but legible, contained 10 pages of writing, rushed, frantic, broken by gaps of silence. Some entries were pleas, some were descriptions of the dark, of scraping sounds, of hunger, of calling out with no response. One phrase repeated 4 times, "I'm under the school." Another appeared twice, "They hear me through the vents." Forensic analysts estimated the writing had occurred over several days, possibly longer. It suggested that Ethan had been alive for at least a short period after he vanished. Alive, alone, trapped. The emotional shock of that truth hit harder than the years of uncertainty ever had. Claire screamed that night, not out of grief, but rage. Rage at the school, rage at the janitor, rage at every single person who had shrugged off her warnings. She sat in the hallway outside Ethan's room for hours, repeating his name like a prayer. Jessica didn't sleep either. She copied every page of the diary by hand, refusing to let it vanish into bureaucracy. Connors returned to the school alone the next day. He walked the entire West Wing, flashlight in hand, retracing steps. He asked for building schematics, pushed for maintenance reports, demanded interviews with every living staff member from 2008. Most of them remembered Ethan. Some remembered the vent complaint. A few remembered hearing stories from Greaves. He said the vent was making noises, one former employee admitted. Said it was nothing, just pipes. But he looked pale. Jumpy. Greaves had written the report, but he hadn't followed up. And now the duct he claimed was cleared had just given up the one thing everyone had been searching for. The implications were damning. Connors contacted the school board, the superintendent, and internal affairs. An internal investigation was opened, but for Claire, it was all just dust. Her son had called for help. He had begged, he had waited, and they hadn't listened. The media caught wind of the discovery within days. The story reignited. Reporters camped outside Milton Ridge again. Photos of the backpack flooded the news. Public outrage followed. Talk shows, podcasts, forums. Everyone wanted to know, how could this happen? But the real question burned deeper. Who had heard Ethan and stayed silent? Walter Greaves was retired, living in a trailer park 2 hours north of Boston, when Connors knocked on his door. He opened it slowly, peering through the screen like a man expecting trouble. His face had sagged with time, deep lines beneath the eyes, thinning hair, a tremble in the fingers that clutched the doorframe. When he recognized Connors, he didn't speak. He just stepped aside and let him in. Inside, the trailer was cramped, cluttered, and dimly lit. The air smelled of cigarettes and old paper. Greaves sat down heavily on the couch, then gestured to a chair without a word. Connors didn't waste time. "We found the backpack," he said. "In the vent, West Wing, same one you filed a report about in November 2008. Greaves looked down at his hands. His knuckles were white. "I need to know what happened," Connors said. A long silence. Then Greaves spoke. "It wasn't supposed to be like that," he whispered. "It was just noise at first. That vent always rattled. Old metal. But that day it sounded different. Like someone was moving inside it." He paused, swallowing. "I went to check. Thought maybe a raccoon got stuck or something. When I opened the panel, I saw a light flash, like a reflection. Then I heard something, breathing, faint." Connors leaned forward. "What did you do?" "I panicked," Greaves said. "I thought I was imagining it. I closed it back up, walked away. But later, I couldn't stop thinking about it, so I went back." He wiped his eyes with a shaking hand. "I opened it again. This time there was nothing. No sound, just a smell, like something was dying in there. I got scared, real scared. I didn't want to lose my job. I didn't want anyone blaming me. So I filed the report, marked it low priority, thought maybe someone else would deal with it later. But no one did," Connors said coldly. Greaves nodded. "I checked again the next week. The smell was worse. I sealed it, screwed it shut. Told myself it was too late." "You knew," Connors said, rising. "You knew a child was in there." "I didn't know," Greaves snapped, voice breaking. "Not for sure. I didn't know it was Ethan until I saw the news. By then, it was too late. And I didn't know how to fix it." Connors didn't reply. He left the trailer and called it in. The confession came too late for prosecution. The statute of limitations had expired on negligence. But Greaves's statement was documented, and a public hearing was scheduled by the school board. He was called to testify. The community exploded with outrage. Parents called for criminal charges. Protesters gathered outside the school. One mother threw a rock at Greaves's trailer window. He was moved to a secure facility for his own protection. Claire refused to attend the hearing. Jessica watched it alone, teeth clenched, as Greaves sat beneath harsh lights and admitted, under oath, that he had ignored the sounds, that he had heard something alive and walked away. But what shook Jessica most wasn't the admission, it was the board's reaction. They thanked him for his honesty. They offered condolences. Then moved on to discuss future safety measures, not accountability, not justice, just procedure. Later that week, Jessica visited the school alone. She stood outside the chained West Wing and stared at the boarded windows. She pulled out Ethan's sketchbook, turned to the last page he'd drawn. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't a vent. It was a child, curled in a dark space, eyes wide, mouth open, as if calling out. Beneath it, in block letters, "Someone heard." He'd known. Somehow Ethan had known someone was out there, that someone had heard him, and they did nothing. Jessica traced the drawing with her thumb, tears blurring her vision. It wasn't just about finding the truth anymore. It was about making sure no one ever ignored it again. The school board's internal investigation, triggered by Greaves's confession, brought new eyes to old spaces. A structural engineer assigned to survey the West Wing noticed something odd. Beneath the boiler room, once used as a storage facility before the wing's closure, there appeared to be an anomaly on the blueprints. A small rectangular space with no visible entrance, marked decades ago as utility access. But it wasn't on any modern floor plan. Connors requested an exploratory dig. With mounting public pressure and press scrutiny, the school reluctantly agreed. 2 days later, beneath layers of dust, piping, and rotted insulation, a narrow concrete tunnel was uncovered. It extended roughly 15 feet before opening into a sealed room no larger than a janitor's closet. Inside, there was no light, no ventilation, no window, just silence. And what was left behind? A rusted chair, a broken flashlight, scraps of crayon and paper with childlike sketches, many of them eerily similar to the ones in Ethan's sketchbook. A torn piece of cloth matching the hoodie Ethan wore the day he vanished. A pile of small bones in one corner. Rat, according to the coroner. But scattered beside them, beneath a cracked floor tile, was something else. A single, brittle bone fragment, smaller than a pinky finger. DNA analysis confirmed what Claire already knew. It was Ethan's. The room, forensic analysts concluded, had been used intentionally or not as a holding space. A void between systems, overlooked in inspections, absent from maintenance. The path to it ran parallel to the old ventilation shaft where the backpack had been found. Somehow Ethan had ended up there, crawling, maybe searching for a way out, or lured or trapped. No one could say how long he'd lived after that. But one thing was certain. He hadn't been alone in that space, not entirely. Symbols had been drawn on the walls, spirals, crosses, jagged stars, all scrawled in red chalk or old paint. In the center of the far wall, written in Ethan's handwriting, was a single phrase: "They can't hear me here." For Claire, this discovery hit like a second death. The first had been the day Ethan vanished. This was the day she buried the hope that he had simply run away, or been taken and might still return. Now she knew. He had died beneath the very place she had stood, week after week, year after year, begging someone to listen. The school issued a public apology. The superintendent resigned. A dozen past employees were subpoenaed for testimony. But nothing could erase the truth etched into concrete. Jessica stood in the forgotten room days later, staring at the phrase on the wall. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply took a photo and walked away. Outside, Connors waited. He'd been there every step of the way, and now he too was changed. This wasn't just another cold case. This was a failure of trust, of duty, of humanity. A child had cried out, and the walls had answered louder than the people. He looked at Jessica. "We might never know how he ended up here," he said. Jessica nodded. "But we know they left him." Connors didn't reply, because they both understood something unspoken. There had been more than one silence in this story. The silence of the vent, the silence of the forgotten room, but also the silence of adults who should have acted and didn't. Claire didn't return to the school after that. She couldn't. But she lit a candle in her window each night, one for Ethan and one for the others, because in the wake of the discovery, another truth had surfaced. A list buried in old district records, 5 other children who had briefly attended Milton Ridge before being pulled out. All marked transferred. All now listed as missing in other counties. 5 names, 5 children, 5 families like hers. And suddenly, the room under the school didn't feel like a fluke. It felt like a pattern. Jessica didn't stop. After the discovery of the hidden room and the school district's delayed acknowledgement of its existence, she refused to let the momentum fade. While officials debated liability, and while media coverage slowly shifted to newer headlines, she dove deeper. She began by researching the names. The 5 transferred students whose files appeared in the archived district database: Alan Reyes, 10 years old, Darnell Pierce, 12, Naomi Richter, 11, Tessa Caldwell, 9, and Brandon Liu, 13. All had attended Milton Ridge between 1998 and 2007. All had vanished within a year of enrollment. All cases were marked as open or unresolved in other jurisdictions. Jessica mapped their residences. Each child had lived within 5 miles of the school. She reached out to families where she could find them. Some had moved away, some didn't respond, but Naomi Richter's aunt replied to her email. They spoke over the phone for 2 hours. Naomi, she said, was troubled, often afraid of shadows and vents. She'd drawn strange things, doors in walls, eyes watching. And 2 weeks before she disappeared, she'd come home with a nosebleed and refused to enter her room. "I thought it was bullying," the aunt said, "but now I wonder if she saw something." Jessica wrote everything down. Then she did something she hadn't told anyone, not even Claire. She tracked down a name she'd seen in the original 2008 maintenance logs, a part-time HVAC technician who'd worked under Greaves, Anthony Kerrigan. He left Milton Ridge suddenly in early 2009. No forwarding contact, no listed number. But a few clicks through public record databases traced him to a rural town in New Hampshire. She borrowed Connors's old car and drove there herself. It was a 2-hour ride through winding roads, winter trees bare and skeletal. When she found Kerrigan's trailer, she wasn't sure what she expected: resistance, denial, confusion. But when he opened the door and saw her, his face drained of color. "You're Ethan's sister," he said. Jessica froze. "I remember your eyes," he murmured. "You used to wait for him by the school gate." He invited her inside. The living room was sparse: a recliner, a television, a pile of newspapers dating back over a decade. He sat across from her with a mug of cold coffee and didn't look her in the eye. "I didn't hurt him," he said, "but I saw something I shouldn't have. That's why I left." Jessica said nothing. She waited. "I was replacing a duct grate," he continued, "back in '08, day after Ethan disappeared. I went into the old boiler shaft to check airflow. The main unit wasn't pulling properly. When I opened a side panel, I heard something." His hands trembled as he reached for the coffee, then didn't drink. "It was soft, like crying or whispering. I called out, but it stopped. I told Greaves. He told me to forget it, said the noise was nothing." He looked up finally. But his face, he looked scared. Not guilty, scared. Jessica leaned forward. "Did you tell anyone?" He shook his head. "I was 23. It was my first real job. I didn't want trouble. But when I saw the news, Ethan's face, I knew he was in there. And no one did anything." Silence stretched between them. "I couldn't sleep for years," he said. "I left Boston. I thought if I stayed quiet it would go away, but it didn't." Jessica stood slowly. "Will you talk to the police?" Kerrigan hesitated, then nodded. "I should have done it years ago." Jessica left with his statement recorded on her phone. That night she sat in Ethan's room, the weight of truth pressing hard against her chest. So many adults had heard something, seen something, felt something, and still silence. But now the silence was breaking, and she wasn't done yet. The news of Anthony Kerrigan's statement hit the Boston Police Department like a lightning bolt. Detective Connors filed it immediately, attaching it to the reopened Miller case under the label Supplemental Testimony, Neglected Lead, 2008. Within days, Internal Affairs escalated the investigation. A second forensic team was dispatched to the school, this time with a court order. The focus was no longer just Ethan, it was the system that failed him. While crews revisited the tunnel and the sealed room beneath the West Wing, another forensic discovery came from a different part of the HVAC network, a narrow chamber between two sections of old ductwork, wedged behind a collapsed wall. There, buried in insulation and debris, they found it. A bone fragment, roughly 3 inches long, a portion of a femur. Human. The room fell silent. DNA analysis confirmed what no one wanted to hear, yet everyone expected. It was Ethan's. The final, undeniable proof that his body had never left the building. Claire received the call at 7:03 p.m. Jessica answered instead. They sat together in Ethan's room. No tears, no words, just the kind of silence that speaks volumes. For so many years they had held on to the hope, however irrational, that maybe he had survived, maybe he had been taken and lost, maybe he would come home. Now, that door had closed forever. Ethan Miller had died inside Milton Ridge Middle School, and no one had noticed. The news broke the following morning. Every major network covered it. Local stations aired special reports. Documentaries were announced. Talk shows invited psychologists, criminologists, and ethics panels. The phrase institutional neglect became a rallying cry. Public outrage poured in from across the country. Parents demanded accountability. Protesters stood outside school board offices, holding candles and signs with Ethan's name. Lawsuits were filed. Investigations were expanded. And for the first time in 16 years, Claire spoke publicly. In a press conference held outside the school gates, she faced the cameras. "My son's voice was small," she said, "but it should have been heard." Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. Ethan was kind, quiet, curious. He trusted the adults around him. And when he was scared, when he needed help, Those adults turned away. She held up a photo of Ethan's drawing, the one with the child curled in the dark, the words beneath it etched in black. Someone heard. They heard, Claire continued, and they chose silence. Her words echoed across screens, news cycles and households. Strangers wept. Parents held their children tighter. Jessica watched it all from the back row, her arms crossed, eyes dry. She didn't need the world to mourn. She needed the world to change. Later that evening, Connors called her. "They're closing the school." Jessica didn't say anything at first. End of the semester, permanent shutdown, full investigation of the district to follow. Still, she was silent. Then she asked, "Do you think this ends here?" Connors hesitated. "No," he said finally. "I think it begins." Because there were still unanswered questions, still children whose files had been buried, still stories half told, dismissed, erased. But now, someone was listening. Jessica stood outside the school the night before demolition crews arrived. She placed a single candle on the steps. It flickered in the wind, for Ethan, for the others, and for the silence that would never be ignored again. Walter Greaves agreed to one last interview. It was Connors who requested it, formally this time, with department oversight, legal counsel present and every word recorded. The purpose was simple, to obtain a final sworn statement clarifying the extent of his knowledge and involvement. But for Connors it was more than that. He wanted the truth to be said aloud. Greaves looked tired when he entered the room, not just old, but hollowed out. He sat down, placed both hands flat on the table, and waited. Connors began with the basics, his role, the vent complaint, the days following Ethan's disappearance. Greaves answered without resistance. Then came the final question. "Did you know Ethan Miller was trapped inside the ventilation system?" Greaves closed his eyes. "I knew something was wrong," he said. "I didn't know it was him, not at first." "Define something wrong," the prosecutor said. "There was a sound," he murmured. "Not animal, not mechanical, a voice. I thought I imagined it, but then I saw—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I opened the panel again. I saw movement, something deep inside, maybe 20 feet back, just a flicker, a shape. I called out. Nothing. Then a whisper. 'Please.' That's all. Just once. 'Please.' The room held its breath. I panicked," Greaves continued. "I was afraid it was a kid, afraid of what it meant, that I'd be blamed. I didn't tell anyone. I told Kerrigan to ignore it. I lied on the report. I sealed the panel the next day. Knowing someone might be inside," Connors pressed. Greaves nodded slowly. "I told myself maybe it wasn't real. Maybe they'd gotten out. But the truth is, I was afraid." He looked up. "And that fear killed that boy." Silence followed. A suffocating, heavy silence. Connors turned off the recorder. Greaves was never charged. There was no statute in Massachusetts for delayed negligent homicide under those circumstances. His job had been protected by union contracts. But the court of public opinion needed no such technicalities. His name was printed in every headline. His face plastered on every news outlet. Protesters lined up outside his trailer. Eventually he disappeared, reportedly moved out of state, changed his name, went underground. But his confession remained, and it gave the story what it had always lacked: a name, a choice, a moment where everything could have changed, but didn't. Claire listened to the recording once. Only once. Afterward, she didn't speak for hours. She walked through the apartment, touching Ethan's drawings, his old Lego sets, the dent in the wall where he'd accidentally thrown a ball too hard. She stood in his room and stared out the window as the sun dipped below the skyline. Jessica stood beside her. "They heard him," Claire whispered. Jessica nodded. They always did. Connors closed the case with one final note. The failure was not in the mystery. It was in the silence after the answer presented itself. He retired 2 weeks later. After nearly 3 decades on the force, the Miller case had broken something in him. He no longer believed in the systems that trained him to wait, to doubt, to delay. He no longer trusted the layers of oversight and paperwork meant to protect the truth. He believed in people. People like Jessica, who refused to stay quiet. People like Claire, who never let grief blind her from what she knew in her bones. People like Ethan, whose voice, small, scared, and buried, still found its way back. Before leaving the department, Connors mailed Jessica a copy of the full case file. Inside was a note. Never let them forget. Jessica kept the file in a locked drawer. Not to preserve the past, but to protect the future. Because as painful as it had been to uncover the truth, it would be far worse to let it disappear again. Ethan's story did not end with the closing of Milton Ridge Middle School. In the months that followed, echoes of his life and loss rippled outward, shaping lives and policies far beyond Boston. Claire Miller found herself suddenly, painfully visible. For years she'd been dismissed, ignored, painted as obsessive. Now she became the voice of reform. She founded the Ethan Miller Foundation, dedicating herself to supporting families of missing children and campaigning for legislative changes. Her work forced new safety protocols in schools statewide, comprehensive inspections of old facilities, improved emergency response plans, mandatory staff training on missing child procedures. It wasn't justice, but it was a legacy that might spare another family her pain. Jessica changed too. The restless anger that once drove her became a quiet purpose. She went to college, majoring in journalism, determined to shine a light where others refused to look. Her first investigative series, about forgotten cases of missing children, garnered national attention. She was relentless, not just because she needed answers, but because she wanted to make sure no one's story was ever buried again. Detective Connors retired, but he didn't disappear. He offered his expertise as a consultant, helping smaller districts establish protocols for missing person cases. He spent his free time in local schools, talking to students about safety, about listening, about the importance of speaking up even when adults fail to act. The badge was gone, but the mission remained. But for all the change, some things never healed. There were nights when Claire woke to silence, expecting to hear Ethan's laugh in the next room. Jessica sometimes dreamed of her brother calling out from dark places, her heart pounding as she reached for him in the half-light. There were anniversaries and birthdays, holidays marked by the absence of a voice, a chair left empty at the table. The school was demolished. In its place, a memorial garden was planted. For each missing child in Massachusetts, a tree was placed, Ethan's name at the center, carved in stone, surrounded by the names of those who had also vanished. Families gathered there each year, holding hands, telling stories, promising to keep searching, keep fighting, keep remembering. As the years passed, the story of Ethan Miller faded from headlines, but not from the hearts of those he touched. His mother's foundation grew, funding search efforts, crisis lines, and awareness campaigns. Jessica's articles inspired new investigations, leading to the closure of 2 other cold cases in nearby districts. Connors's work helped create the first statewide registry for unsolved school disappearances, and through it all, Ethan's drawings remained. On a shelf in Claire's home, in the files Jessica carried, in the hearts of those who had finally listened. His words became a mantra for families everywhere. Someone heard, because it wasn't just about one boy lost. It was about the silence that nearly swallowed him, and the courage it took to break it. If you followed this story to the end, you know now that silence is never the answer. When someone needs help, when something feels wrong, it's up to each of us to speak, to act, to listen. For Ethan, for all those still waiting to be found, don't let their stories fade. If this story moved you, or if you believe in the importance of never giving up, subscribe to the channel. Your support helps share stories that matter and keeps the memory of Ethan and others like him alive. And if you want to keep exploring stories of hope, justice, and the search for truth, click on the video suggested on your screen right now. There's always more to uncover. There's always another story waiting to be heard. Thank you for staying with us until the very end.